Welcome to today's webinar entitled Microgrid Enabled Electric Transportation for K-12 and Higher Education. My name is Billy Zadig, Manager of Special Programs for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage under the Continuous Learning tab later today. Professional continuing education certificates are being offered for today's program. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate at registration and meet the requirements will receive certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the questions by one of our presenters. If you're just calling in, make sure you send an email to me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @APA.org, so I can send you a certificate if you would like one. The system only recognizes you if you log in. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Karen Sanchez, who will introduce our speakers today. Karen, take it away.
Thanks, Billy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Sanchez with Siemens Smart Infrastructure. I'm the Marketing Manager for K-12 and Higher Education. Related to microgrid, clean energy, and electrification of school and campus transportation, we have a lot of funding opportunities now. So I wanted to just cover this quickly before we move into our main speakers. Over the last 2 years, Washington, D.C. has passed and signed into law about a decade's worth of energy policy. And now we're in a place where cyclically these programs are ready to move. The bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act are really fulsome with a lot of facilities and building level components to them, as well as aspects focused on clean energy, renewables, and electrification infrastructure and programs. So the BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which was previously known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, provides billions of dollars to help schools address climate change and create healthier, more sustainable learning environments. Programs like Renew America's Schools, which is for energy efficiency and school modernization, as well as some innovative technologies, falls in here. The Clean School Bus Program with rebates that rolled out last fall, and other grid modernization and EV programs are all under this grouping. A number of these programs are in the implementation process. The Inflation Reduction Act uses a range of mechanisms to support climate action over the next decade and beyond. There's a variety of grants and incentives for green energy and pollution reduction. Additionally, there's tax credits. The clean energy tax credits also include a direct pay option that are explicitly designed for tax exempt organizations. So direct pay is available for tax exempt entities for tax years starting December 31st of 2022, all the way through January 1st of 2033. The covered technologies include solar, battery storage, microgrid controller, wind, electrical vehicle charging stations, combined heat and power, geothermal, and manufacturing. So with the investment tax credit, it's really up to a 30% credit of eligible project costs. For systems larger than a megawatt of electrical or thermal energy, the base credit is 6%. And you must meet a prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirement to receive the full 30% credit on eligible project costs. Under 1 meg, the credit is 30%. Similarly, there's a production tax credit, which is 1.5 cents per kW produced. And again, that prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements apply for larger than 1 megawatt. So once a qualifying clean energy system is installed and fully operational, and the entity fulfilled any requirements like prevailing wage and apprenticeships, back to the previous slide, they're eligible for the tax credit, or if tax exempt in lieu of a credit, once they fulfill those those things, the project cost will get that credit. There's grants in addition to tax credits. Actually, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, I'll cover first, can offer higher ed access to financing mechanisms to support mitigation efforts. It provides grants to help establish green banks across the country, each with the goal of rapid deployment of low and zero emissions technologies. We're still on the previous slide, just a heads up, Katie. It can include higher ed projects as well as those in surrounding communities. One example of similar financing to the green banks is a partnership between Morgan State University, Maryland Clean Energy Capital, and Siemens Industry. So as part of a comprehensive campus-wide master energy and sustainability plan, Morgan State completed an energy performance contract through financing to install energy efficiency measures and equipment on their campus. That'll significantly reduce energy consumption, increase operational efficiency, and address selected deferred maintenance projects. There's other grants opportunities in the Inflation Reduction Act where higher ed can partner with others to advance greenhouse gas reduction efforts, support workforce development and training, expand career pathways, for example, training technicians to install and maintain zero emission and resilient technologies. We can go to the next slide, which is a little crisper snapshot for the education market perspective. So under the bipartisan infrastructure law, I had mentioned the Clean School Bus Program. It's $5 billion over 5 years, of which $1 billion was awarded last fall to about 400 schools. An additional 1,500 are waitlisted. So there is great movement in electrification within schools. The Renew America School Grant, the second one here from the Department of Energy, it was a competitive grant program that's in process. Round one was due in January, and we will see those selections coming out late, summer, fall time, and that's for energy efficiency and health improvements, as well as some innovative energy technology packages, which could include electrification of transportation. The Inflation Reduction Act, I covered that quite a bit on the prior slide, but really it's built around building a clean energy economy. It's very significant and has long-term benefits for K-12 and higher ed to meet their climate goals. And many of these technologies our speakers are going to touch on today. All in all, it's important for you to really work with your internal tax department or outside tax counsel or advisor to decide if your institution qualifies for clean energy tax incentives. Siemens doesn't provide tax advice or counsel. But should you have any questions related to your campus's situation or plans or opportunities to leverage federal funding or any of the technologies being discussed today, please enter them into the chat. If your question is not answered today, we'll be sure to connect you with an energy management or sustainability or funding specialist following today's webinar. So now let me introduce the main speakers from Siemens Smart Infrastructure: Katie Glynn, Senior Account Executive, and Todd Thurlow, Director, Distributed Energy Systems. Katie?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for going through such a detailed analysis of all the funds that are available. I will say that as an account executive working with sustainability and energy projects, we are seeing a lot of people getting awarded these funds. So please don't be discouraged. Please go after them and please ask for help. We can't write the grants exactly, but we've done a lot of work helping people frame up the information for the grants, so definitely reach out if that's something that you're looking to do. So again, my name is Katie Glynn. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. I'm very excited about the level of interest here. We've got some great information prepared. I'm going to open up and start going through kind of a higher level explanation of what's happening in the energy market, specifically with electric vehicles. And we'll follow that up with Todd Thurlow, who will take it more on a deeper dive on a technology side And we'll hopefully wrap up with time for questions. You can again submit them in the chat. So let's begin. Why make a move towards e-mobility or electric transportation? I kind of like to shake things up a little bit and start out by saying, I'd like you to think for a moment about the consequences or the value of cost, rather, of not making a change. It's kind of an upside down way of thinking about things, but just looking at the market and what's happening in the education, the commercial market and all different sectors, I believe the education committee, an education component really needs to think about what happens if we don't do anything. In other words, what happens if we sit back and do nothing? So let's explore that a little bit. I start with this slide because we encounter a lot of people sometimes saying, well, we're too far north, or we don't get that much sun, or it's not really that relevant. And I can assure you that we have solar projects, successful ones from Minnesota to California to New York, Florida, and beyond. And so, as you all know, anywhere you live, you are getting solar of some level at some time. And the question is that a resource that I want to ignore? And if we look and see what's happening in the market from the commercial side, you'll see that people are saying, no, we don't want to ignore that. We want to start capitalizing on electric vehicles. So when you go out into the community, you're seeing a lot of different examples, whether it's Coca-Cola or FedEx, local vendors, UPS, even your local transit department are moving towards green energy and clean vehicles. And what we don't want to see is this, that education, the world of education, is kind of left behind in the dust or the fumes, if you will, and we're saying, well, the rest of the world is kind of moving towards this clean energy opportunity, but we're not ready to do that yet. When we look at the statistics, and I'm bringing some data up from the Environmental Law and Policy Center, these are from K through 12 space. So we're talking about students that may be a little bit younger than, the higher ed groups are typically thinking about. But if you think about it just from a human perspective, all of this health data certainly is going to be relevant. But for the K through 12 team, people that are on the call, let's think about the importance and the magnitude. So we've got about 25 million kids a day that are getting transported in school buses. It's the largest form of mass transportation in our country. So it's a significant impact that we're talking about across the board. Be mindful of the fact that the younger that you are, the more percentage of air per pound of body weight gets impacted, your lungs, and children are definitely more vulnerable to cancer and respiratory diseases because of pollution. And that's another thing to keep in mind as we protect our students. A child or an adult, a teacher, any passenger sitting in the back of a bus with the windows closed is exposed to 4 times more diesel pollution than a person riding in the car in front of the same bus. So a lot of times we think, oh, I'm really only impacted when the bus goes by, but when you're sitting on the bus, you're getting exposed to those fumes as well. So we need to think about that whole wellness experience from every student that's riding a transportation or using transportation to get to their educational locations. Again, another health-related issue that the diesel bus tailpipe emissions are strongly connected with asthma. We know that for very young children all the way up to college age kids as well, they're impacted by that. It can upset school attendance and availability. The other thing to keep in mind is that wheelchair lifts on buses are usually near the rear of the bus, so you're getting exposed to that tailpipe. Normally buses need to be running to operate those lifts, and so anybody who's either disabled or needing that extra support is really getting slammed with really bad air breathing as well. So those are that's one aspect to think about from why wouldn't we do this. And of course, we also have to look at the financial and the technology aspects of it as well. So let's go and pivot a little bit to say, okay, what are we learning about e-mobility? And as someone that works for a very large company, and we talk to different sectors, vertical markets all across the country, really all across the world, that are looking at moving towards electric or other clean energy types of transportation, I will tell you that one of the most important slides that I share is this one. And that's to say that we have to keep in mind that this interest in clean energy is all across the community. We've got a lot of different sectors that are all seeking more clean energy options, whether it's an airport or education, if it's a hospital, data centers, hotels, everybody is out there looking for more clean energy options. And just keep in mind that clean energy isn't, though we're used to just being able to plug something into the wall and trust that it's there, we're learning that the demand is really increasing, and we have to be very mindful about where that demand is going to come from and how to ensure that it's there when we need it, particularly for our clean energy projects such as electric transportation. That said, one of the, kind of a background slide, or I like to call it the credibility slide. In other words, why listen to us is kind of giving you some idea of where Siemens is at with regard to electrification of transportation. We've been in the business for over 12 years. We've installed over 100,000 charging points across the globe. We have a large research and development arm. We also manufacture EV chargers right here in the United States as well. So we're very much ingrained with the idea of developing realistic and functioning sustainable electric chargers, as well as facilitating that electrical need to make these electric transportation projects happen. So that said, I love this picture. I know it's kind of funky, but I like it. It's like, how do we bridge the gap from where we are now to where we want to be with electric transportation? It's something that we as a society are capable of, but what are things that are going to be required to get us there? And I talk about holistic energy solutions all the time, and we'll really kind of dive into that as we continue, and Todd will cover some things later. But if you think about 3 major points to kind of walk away with, number 1 is we need to mitigate your risk of critical operations power loss. And by that I mean, if you're going to move to electric transportation, we need to make sure that we've done everything possible to make sure the electricity and power that you need to run those vehicles is going to be available when you need the vehicles to move. So that's option number 1. Second is, how do we migrate to electric vehicle operations? It's a whole change management process of different types of vehicles, different types of maintenance requirements, different types of power requirements, different types of operating requirements and capabilities. So getting our culture to shift to that is really a big part of this whole process. Getting comfortable and confident that an electric vehicle can accomplish exactly what I need it to accomplish, as it always has done. And then finally, and maybe something that we don't think about as much, but is just as important, is monitoring for optimized performance and maintenance. One of the most important things that we can do in this electric vehicle movement is to make sure that all this equipment is still functioning 3 years from now. And monitoring and a whole digital layer of keeping track of things, and energy asset management basically, will help you know that your systems are operating as they should. You'll be able to see predictive analytics for when things are behaving strangely, and maybe before they fail, you can get in there and repair things. You can also be aware of how much power is available at each charger, and even to the point where you can plan how much power each vehicle needs to execute the mission of the day, so you're not overcharging or undercharging. That's a great way to extend the life of that equipment as well. So let's say you are ready to get started, and you're saying, how do I do this? How can I prepare? What do I need to start thinking about if I want to start transitioning my fleet to electric transportation? So whether you're higher ed or K through 12, whether you're looking at school buses, transit buses, shuttles, vans, whatever the type of vehicle might be, we're all going to go through the same type of process of preparing to understand how a successful project would look. So here's one example that we've worked on. This is a school district that owns 100 electric school buses, and they wanted to convert 90 to maybe 98% of those buses to electric and asked us, how do we do this? So let's go on the journey with them, and I'll explain to you the analysis that we were able to do. And we, again, saying to state, we're not going to do all 100 buses on the same day. We're going to create a phased approach. So we started with 10, we moved to 30, and then we ended up with about 90 of the 100 buses that they wanted to operate. And how did we get them there? So it starts with analysis. And what you'll see on the screen right now is a detailed analysis of specific routes that were driven, specific to 10 buses. You'll see that this particular operation of adding 10 buses to the fleet with level 2 chargers only had an annual power requirement of about 348,000 kilowatt hours, which was equivalent to, say, a typical elementary school. In this particular location, and as you can see from the Google Earth image, this is a very rural location. They were fortunate that the grid in their situation was able to supply enough power for them to do those 10 buses and level 2 chargers without really doing much to upgrade the grid, which was extraordinary. So they were able to do this relatively inexpensively with just level 2 chargers with 10 buses on specifically designed routes that would match the power requirements. But now let's say we're ready to move to phase 2. And now we're going to have 30 buses, and we're adding 5 level 3 chargers because now we have a higher charging requirement and maybe some buses that don't have the capacity to charge during the middle of the day. So now we're looking at entirely different power dynamic. So when we increased the battery and the buses to 30, we now needed to add the level 3 chargers. And we also, if you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner, that blue space is a helioscope of a 750 kilowatt solar array. Up at the top, you'll see a tiny kind of light blue rectangle. That is a battery. So now what we've created is a microgrid-enabled smart charging system for 30 electric buses. And that enabled them to have the power requirement they needed to run those 30 buses and the routes that they had chosen for those. And you'll also see here, we're looking at about 84% of that energy requirement was offset by the solar and the battery. And you can also see we had some measurement of the carbon offset as well. This I'm going to share with you just to kind of show you a little bit about what that daily charge profile looks like. This obviously is a school bus situation. So you've got buses that are sitting idle in the middle of the day, high levels of peak charging in the middle of the day. Of course, the profile would change drastically depending on what your charge would look like. But now, again, as we talked about, we've got a microgrid. And just real quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with what a microgrid is, Todd will go into this in quite a bit more detail later, but the basic functions of a microgrid include an on-site power creation. So in this case, it's a solar array. We've got battery storage, switchgear. We've got microgrid controllers. Obviously, you have the EV chargers and an EV charging management platform. And you're connecting that to the grid, or in some cases, you'd want to be able to island that from the grid. If the grid goes down, you'd still want that microgrid controller directing all the power according to what the energy needs would be for that operation. But essentially, this is the basics, if you will, of what a microgrid-enabled smart charging system would look like to manage electric vehicles. So let's real quickly move to phase 3. Now we've got 90 school buses that are electric. We've got a significant energy load, 4 million kilowatts over the period of a year. And as you can see from the image, this school district was fortunate to have a pretty large piece of farmland that they could add some solar to and connect that underground to the transportation center to be able to facilitate the power needed for the 90 buses. So continued expansion to 60 buses. That's level 2 chargers, 90 buses, 60 level 2 chargers, and 20 level 3 chargers. We recommended a 2,300 kilowatt solar array with a 750 kilowatt battery energy storage system for peak shaving and reduced demand charges. Again, in this particular case, this is how we designed the enhanced energy supply for their growing demand of power for those 90 electric buses. Similarly, let's look at a case for a higher ed institution that said, hey, we want to jump on the bandwagon on this electric bus charging. So not as much detail, but just kind of going over what their process was. They wanted to transition to electric transit buses. They were already underway with several electric buses operating already, but they wanted to move that up to an actual bus depot. And in their case, they decided to dedicate a feeder only for the bus depot, which is a really great move. They added some solar that would be interconnected to the dedicated feeder and provide the carbon-free transit solution. Also a microgrid solution, including battery storage, so the buses can be charged even when the utility feeder might be down. Really setting up a maximum utilization of renewable energy for their project. So just a simple example of what a higher ed bus depot project might look like if you wanted to see that as well. So as we kind of following along with what Karen shared at the front, you know, there's a lot of funding available, and some people will get it, some people won't. You may be in a situation where you don't have access to that funding, but you're still really interested in trying to engage into the electric vehicle market. You know, what options might someone like you have? Fortunately, the market and the financing mechanisms that are, you know, trying to encourage electric fleet implementation has come up with some great financial models that you can look at as well. So consider transportation as a service model to test implementation of electric vehicles without having to purchase and maintain expensive equipment. So let me explain that to you in a little bit more detail. I do want to say this one caveat, that the transportation as a service model right now works very well for fleets that have significant miles per year. School buses don't fit this model right at the moment just because of the high level cost of the electric vehicles, but I do have a solution for K through 12 that I'll talk about in the next slide. But for a transit operation, the transportation as a service really comes in and allows you to say, I mean, in simple terms, it's kind of like paying a Netflix fee rather than going out and purchasing all the equipment. You're paying a fee to have another partner develop your real estate needs, your planning, your EV charging, the site development, and they run and maintain all of the equipment so that you're really getting access to electric transportation without having to take the risk of investing into the capital required for all that of equipment. So if that's something that you're interested in, it's definitely something you can explore. For K through 12, here's where we are finding some success. If you're a part of the EPA Clean School Bus program, you'll see on the left-hand side, that covers the darker blue area, the EV fleets and some charging equipment, but there's still significant amounts of work that need to be done. The designing and the planning, the charging software, the PPAs, those types of things. If you are in the good fortunate position of having been awarded some EPA Clean School Bus money and you're looking for additional support, transportation as a service can be a good supplement to what you've started already. This one slide I'm gonna share. It looks a little basic, I guess, but I want to share it because I think it's if you take away one thing from this entire conversation, at least from my perspective, from what I'm sharing, what I've seen and what we're learning is that the business model with electric transportation has as much to do, if not more, with understanding the energy market as it does with actually understanding electric vehicles and chargers. So I share this slide with you because I wanted to make sure that if you start to implement an electric transportation solution, make sure you have a partner who's checking with you on all of the available tax incentives, market dispatch availability, net metering, utility rebates, asset management, demand response. All these are ways of saying you're really hedging your energy procurement and utilization to take advantage of all of the pricing that's available in the market and really optimize the value of your electric project. So it's a complicated element of what we're talking about here, but just I wouldn't feel right without telling you that this is a big piece of it to get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. So make sure if you implement a project, you've got somebody telling you about all these components, because it's going to be a big play and how your project pencils out. The one other thing that I want to mention is what we hear a lot from our customers who are implementing these technologies is, hey, we don't have anybody here who knows how to fix an electric bus. We don't have anybody here who knows how to fix a charger. We don't have the maintenance support. We really need a lot of help on the just maintaining all this. And the good news is that there's a lot of digital support from a maintenance and sustainability and monitoring perspective that can really help you supplement your maintenance and technology requirements or technical requirements and keeping all this equipment active. So the new age of digital and AI, we're able to do predictive analytics. So for example, if we're monitoring EV charging and we see there's some abnormal energy consumption identified, we might say, hey, I think there's something up with this charger. Let's dial in. Let's see if we can remotely upgrade the software. Or in some cases, you may have to get someone out to fix it. But if that's the case, you'll have a pretty good understanding of what parts are needed to get that repair done. So this continuous monitoring aspect, or the digital aspect of electric transportation and energy asset management, really does show that you see a 4% reduction in energy costs and up to 20% reduction in peak demand. So the energy optimization from a digital perspective is really key, kind of going back into that idea of it's a business model as much as anything else to know and understand. So that said, why energy resiliency is important. And by energy resiliency, we go back to the idea that I need to make sure that the energy that I need is there when I need it. We need to talk about incorporating advanced technologies such as microgrids to power your school more effectively and reliably. And here's where I turn it over to my capable colleague, Todd Thurlow. Todd?
Yes, thank you, Katie. Thanks, Katie. So I guess I'll start by saying, as we electrify transportation, we're essentially transferring the operation or the energy supply to those vehicles from one supply chain, which is a fuel supply chain, to another supply chain, which is an electrical supply chain. So effectively, we're becoming more dependent on the production and availability of electricity, either through the grid or through on-site generation. And so what that creates a different set of risks. And unfortunately, as this graphic shows here, we've seen more and more a growing risk to the electric grid here in the US. I mean, through not only cyber attacks, but as shown here, large scale climate and weather events. And there's no regions are safe from these. These seem to be occurring in different forms around the country, and there seem to be growing with frequency and growing with scale. In 2020, we set a record with 22 billion-dollar weather and climate events. And in 2022, this last year, there were $18 billion weather events. And it was also the 10th consecutive year where we had 10 or more billion-dollar weather events. So the frequency of these is growing, the impact of them is growing. And when we think about what that means for our transportation infrastructure, our electric transportation infrastructure, it means we have to prepare for that. We have to think about contingencies in the cases where the grid may not be available. We still have to, execute our transportation function. How do we do that? So, Katie, if we can go to the next one. That is where we talk where microgrids come into play, and I'm going to talk a fair bit about the microgrid technology here over the next few slides. But first, Katie talked a little bit about it with that school bus case study. And so what is a microgrid essentially? A microgrid is a collection of local generation and loads that can be controlled locally and independent of the grid. So when the grid is operating, the local generation, whether that's gas-fired gen sets or diesel gen sets or solar or wind or other things, they can be operating in parallel with the grid, and the microgrid controller can be optimizing dispatch based on economics, choosing between grid power and locally generated power, but it can operate normally. When the microgrid controller senses that the grid is going down for some reason, there's some disruption coming in terms of power service, the microgrid controller can open the main breaker and take control of the local assets, such that there's no interruption in service. This may require discharging a battery. It may require starting some backup generation. It may require sending curtailment instructions to a building management system, and that is all programmed into the microgrid controller. So that happens automatically, and generally, in most cases, folks on that campus or in those buildings don't even see a blip in their service. It's a very seamless transition. And the microgrid controller operates the local assets, the local generation to serve the load, and when it senses the grid is back, then it starts, it resynchronizes with the grid. It goes through a set of rules to shut down local generation, and then we go back to parallel operation. So what are the benefits of this microgrid controller and this local generation? They're listed here, and you can see them. There's a number of benefits. There's economic benefits associated with being able to shave your peak demand. They can save demand charges from the utility or the ISO. There's the ability to optimize and dispatch of different generation types based on economics. There's the obvious resiliency benefits of being able to operate independent of the grid, right? Being able to operate seamlessly whether the grid is up or not, blackout detection, all of those types of things. There's also sustainability benefits in that the microgrid controller will allow your on-site solar generation to continue to produce electricity even when the grid is down. Otherwise, that solar would shut down as it doesn't have a signal to follow. So it allows for extended use of on-site renewables. It can make dispatch decisions based on carbon dioxide levels and sustainability objectives. It can do forecasting for optimization of battery dispatch and all of those things. So a number of benefits that the microgrid controller can provide. So if we go to the next one, Katie. So when we think about building out, I talked about that, switching from one supply chain, which is fuel, to another supply chain, which is electricity. That has a whole separate infrastructure piece to it. And so when we think about building out the infrastructure to support, large scale transition to electric vehicles, we have to think not just about the chargers and the rolling stock, but we also have to think about, in parallel with that, what is the energy component of that, from just the upgrades that may be required in terms of low and medium voltage gear, to do you want to include on-site generation like solar canopies or rooftop solar? Do you want to include battery storage? Do you want to include backup generators and things that will provide the ability to have a microgrid on site? And these two elements, the charging and rolling stock piece, need to be developed in close integration with the energy piece, all the way through, from conception to engineering to design and build, all the way through to the asset management program that Katie was talking about, to ensure that those assets are optimized not only on day one, but they're optimized on day 500. And that requires active and flexible management of those assets to take advantage of opportunities that may exist in the market for things like demand response, and other ways to maximize the value of those very flexible assets that are being installed. So if we continue on, Katie. So I like this slide. It's a good illustration of, what are the implications to electric load of electrifying our transportation. And if we pick the one in the middle, that Transamerica building, as our sort of baseline, right? So just over 2 megawatts of peak load for that Transamerica building. And so if that's our baseline, we think about 100 electric vehicles. It's about a third of, it adds about a third of that at 700 kW. That's not so bad, right? If we talk about medium duty trucks, 100 medium duty trucks, it's pretty close to one Transamerica building. But as we get into real transit, school buses, transit buses, 100 school buses, now we're talking about the equivalent peak load of 2 Transamerica buildings. And if we talk about 100 transit buses, we're now talking about the peak demand of 4 Transamerica buildings. And so this has impact on, it brings up a lot of questions. Can the utility serve that load, right, without significant upgrades? It creates complexity, as I talked about previously, in how do we define and design the infrastructure needed to serve that kind of a peak load? What are the economic implications of that? How do we manage those, the demand charges, the cost of electricity to support that? That's all part of the load management that needs to be considered when building out this type of an infrastructure scale. And then, how do we go about planning, the deployment of the infrastructure needed? And, you saw the case study that Katie showed, which was a real phased approach to that. So, maybe it's not 100 transit buses tomorrow, maybe it starts with 5 or 10, and then we're going to build out to 100 over the next 5 or 10 years. How do we plan out and phase that infrastructure build out so that, we have the ability to provide this level of service we need today, but we make it scalable to meet, the needs of tomorrow. So interesting slide. So let's move to the next one. And so one of the things, I talked about the impact on load and, how that comes back to, in many cases or some cases, can the utility even serve that load? If we call the utility and say, I'm going to put I need to put 8 megawatts of new load onto my distribution feeder, the answer may be, well, we don't have the capacity to serve that. And one of the ways to mitigate that is through what we call a microgrid enabled smart charging. Because if we get in a case now with utilities where we need a new transformer or we need a new distribution feeder to serve that load, we could be looking at years. I mean, right now the lead time on medium voltage, high voltage gear is scary. And it's expensive as well. So if we can't hear back from the utility that it's going to take 2 years and millions of dollars for them to be able to serve the load that we would like to put on the feeder, then we need to look for alternatives. And the microgrid controlled enabled smart charging is an alternative. What it effectively does by putting the microgrid controller at our point of interconnection, it ensures that the connection limit is not violated. It essentially manages the downstream loads to ensure that we stay within the physical limitations of the existing infrastructure, the existing transformer. So that's one way for us to, again, mitigate that timely and costly utility upgrades. And it's tied, that microgrid controller is tied right in with the EV charging infrastructure management platform, which will manage the EV charging so that, again, we don't create a peak demand that exceeds the physical limitation. And then there are a number of capabilities through that platform that optimizes that charging against a set of on-site generation, against which includes our battery storage, which can be dispatched as part of that peak shaving process as well. And if there's a building management system in as well, then that can be part of the ecosystem that the microgrid controller manages as part of this whole system. So now I think if we go on to the next one, and I guess this is the last one where I wanted to end here talking about microgrids, is that it's not just about making sure that, you know, our buses are charging when we need them to, although that's critically important. It's even more important that it can provide really life-saving services to the community. And this is an example of a microgrid that we have participated in up at Blue Lake Rancheria in Northern California. And this rancheria has a hotel and a conference center and some other buildings there on site. And just last December, there was a 6.2 earthquake up in Humboldt County in Northern California. And there was over 70,000 homes without power in the county. And the rancheria became an emergency center where people came and provided simple things like abilities to charge their cell phone, you know, ability to, you know, get into air conditioning and so forth. So it became a real hub for the community because the microgrid controller allowed it to not lose power in the wake of that earthquake. And this wasn't an isolated incident. In 2019, when the utility PG&E was having rolling blackouts for public safety power shutoff when there were risks of wildfires, the rancheria maintained power and served the community there and was credited with saving 4 lives by providing emergency medical equipment that required the electricity to operate. So it really became, like I said, an emergency center for the community. And so it's not just about providing electricity for the buses, which is important, but also providing, you know, serving the needs of the community in times of need like this. And I think with that, the presentation is over and we can start looking at questions.
Thank you, Todd. I really appreciate your part of the presentation as well. Karen, any questions for us, or what else? How else can we help?
Yes. Thank you, Katie and Todd. We have a few questions. Some are pretty specific, so we will do a follow-up post-webinar. And there's a couple here. One kind of ties into, Todd, what you were just talking about, ROI. Like there is more than $1 ROI. You know, it's really that serving community. But we did have a question. I don't know, Katie or Todd, if you'd like to field it, of what is the ROI from all the equipment and land and solar, you know, just generally speaking, I think. Do you have additional comments there?
Yeah, let me answer that question this way. It's different everywhere. Electricity prices vary by state, by utility, by region of the country. And so it varies. Each microgrid, I would say, is customized for the load, for the location, for the resources available, for the fuels available. I will say this, the business case, the economic case for these projects is a critical component of this. You know, so it's always factored in. We do very, you know, extensive economic modeling to show what are the cost benefits of this going to be, what are the cost, you know, premiums, if there are going to be. And so that is definitely factored in to the analysis of these projects. But in almost all cases, you know, we can design a solution that is at parity or better than the cost of grid power.
Correct. Great. And I would just amplify that, and thank you, Todd. That's a great answer. From an account executive perspective, we don't do any projects that aren't business driven from an economics perspective. If it's a power purchase agreement, keep in mind that those are green energy investment dollars. And so you've got very, very smart people who are analyzing the value of the project, and they won't get behind it if they don't see the value. For performance contracting, where you're actually leveraging energy savings, those are always what we call zero cost projects. So you have to identify and guarantee a certain amount of energy savings that's being created by all the equipment and the overall value over, say, a 20-year period. It has to amount to essentially zero cost. So it all balances out from an ROI perspective. We also do extreme due diligence when you're looking at the operation of the electric vehicles. Again, if you go back to that case study, that was a highly cost-sensitive driven phased approach with the 10, 30, and 90 buses, because we were looking at the most cost-effective ways to operate each size, if you will. So I can tell you this, projects don't get done if they don't have that ROI, and Todd's absolutely right. Each location is going to have a really interesting, its own personality, its own dynamics, its own energy, positives and negatives, if you will. But the ROI has got to be there, and we see it all over the country with this penciling out. So I hope that answered the question.
Okay, and maybe just a separate question, if you want to build on that any further. There was one about, is it better for big cities versus rural, and small entities versus larger? I think you may have already kind of touched on that, but did you have anything else to add?
Todd, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Well, what I would say is, again, it's when you get into, there's some obvious things, right? When you get into big cities, you don't have the real estate available that you'd have in more rural areas to put like ground mounted solar. So you certainly, any site you look at, you have to factor in what is available space for different technologies and energy infrastructure. So that becomes an issue. Also, you're going to have difference in electricity costs in most cities versus rural areas, and so that gets factors in as well. Regarding scale, certainly economies of scale help. There's, in terms of, building out these new infrastructure pathways. So, that's why we talked about kind of the phased approach, so that even if the first phase may not be significant scale, but you're building towards scale, because there are economies as you do.
Right, perfect. I would just add one thing. No matter where you are, no matter what your environment or location, if it's urban, rural, north, south, you have resources available to you. If it's sunlight, or if it's wind, or if it's geothermal, or what have you, you have energy resources on your property that you should explore to see if that can help you be more cost effective in reducing your energy costs, if it can help you be mindful about carbon reduction, if it can help you use that resource to power electric fleets for mobility that you need. I would say everybody on this call, you've got resources available to you of some kind. Find a partner that can help you sit down and evaluate what your resources are and how your resources could best be used for sustainability projects of this kind. Undoubtedly, everybody on the call will have some kind of project that you can do that will have a clear ROI. It's the creativity and it's the uniqueness, and it's really finding a partner that will help you walk through and really understand your unique environment. That's the key to all of that. And again, whatever that project is, having a partner that will help you connect to all of the available funding, incentives, renewable energy credits, tax incentives, all of those things. There's never been a better time to explore this. So I just really encourage you to do that, to see what's out there and get a good partner to help you out. But everybody's got resources and opportunities no matter where you are. Take a look and see what you find.
Great. I'm just going to mention one last question, which may need individual follow-up, but maybe in general, what is the average life cycle for microgrid components, for example, PV and battery storage? Is that a question that can be answered with an average type of answer?
Sure. Things like solar PV, they're 20 or 25-year assets. Okay. Battery storage, I know vendors are providing capacity guarantees out for 15 years. And then with augmentation, they can go beyond 15 to 20 or 25 years. So These I would call these, 20-year plus assets.
Okay, great. And I know I said that was the last one, but one more came in, and it might be more for Katie.
Okay.
How do you match the asset charge time to the time of day to charge and the time the asset can work before needing recharge? For example, maybe better to get one smaller bus instead of
Yes.
smaller buses instead of one large bus due to the charge time.
That's a great question. And again, so when we did our analysis for the school that had 100 school buses, we actually took all of the individual routes, the number of students on the buses. We can even go deep dive into how much, is it hilly? Is it flat? What types of challenges are you going to have? I would absolutely say that time of charge, we have to look at what is that vehicle trying to accomplish every day. Is it a set route? Is it an unknown? How many people are riding in it? What size does it have to be? It could be very, very specific. And then we start looking at, based upon the vehicle type and the utilization, we start looking at the charging type that's required. If you've got opportunity for overnight charging, you might be able to just do a level 2. Sometimes we have several level 2s, and we put a level 3 charger in the mix just in case you kind of have an emergency top off, or you have, say, a visiting school comes in with a couple buses or vehicles, and they're just there for a football game or an entertainment event of some kind. You want to have some fast charging available for your guests that are coming in with electric vehicles. All those things can be talked about and discussed and really tailor-made for your situation.
Well, great. I think we're at the end here of questions. Some folks, like I said, will be following up with you post-webinar. And in the meantime, Katie, Todd's info is here as well. Should you have other specific questions, feel free to reach out. And thank you for your time. Billy, any closing comments? Then I think we just need to click to that last slide, Katie, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.